Welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. Today, I'm speaking with high performance coach Derek Evely. Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to episode 51 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. So today we've got Derek Evely on the phone, and the reason I wanted to get Derek on because he is one of the go-to guys when it comes to the Bondachuk methodology. So if you're not aware of the Bondachuk methodology and the man himself, don't worry, because Derek goes into a lot of detail around the methodology, around the time that he spent with Dr. B. So this episode, that's the crux of the conversation, and I found it fascinating to kind of delve into how it came about and how Derek's learned from Dr. Bondachuk. So just before we get into the episode with Derek, just want to remind you of the Pacey Performance webinar series, which episode 1 of that is going out on Sunday the 11th of October at 10 a.m. British Summer Time, although far from summer even today. So that is with Dan Baker. So that is a webinar, obviously, but don't worry if you are asleep at that time, if you're in the US, because all the recordings were made available to everyone that books online. So if you are interested, go to paceyperformance.co.uk/Dan Baker. That'll take you to the page with all the information, everything you need to know. From there, you can purchase the webinar, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the 11th of October, because it'll be a really good event. So if you are liking the podcast, give me a follow on Twitter and like the page on Facebook. So we are at Pacey Perform and Pacey Performance on Facebook. So you can catch all previous episodes of the podcast if you go to paceyperformance.co.uk/podcast. And all the links that Derek mentions in this episode, and there is quite a few, go to paceyperformance.co.uk/51. So enjoy the chat with Derek, and I'll speak to you soon. Okay, hi guys, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. So today we've got Derek Evely on the phone. So just before we get Derek in, just want to thank, who was it that put me in touch with Derek? It was Alex Natera. So thanks Alex for getting Derek, making that connection. So just before we get going, just want to thank Derek for his time and get him to give us a bit of a short introduction on his education, his background, and what he's currently doing. So welcome to the podcast, Derek.
Thanks, Rob. It's good to be here. Well, currently I'm a stay-at-home dad, to be honest with you, and I'm not fully employed in any sort of formal way. I'm basically volunteer coaching, and I do a lot of consulting worldwide with different federations, or do conference work and things like that. I don't do a whole lot of it, but I do enough of it so that it pays for some of the expenses of coaching. And actually, my accountant will tell you it doesn't. But that's basically that's sort of where I've gone now. Just sort of sitting enjoying life. I'm not. My formal education is I have a phys ed degree with a sport focus. Most of what I know in terms of what we're going to discuss today is all self-taught, self-discovered through mentors, especially my work when I was working for the Canadian Athletics Coaching Center, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point. That was a big opportunity for me to sort of learn a lot. A lot of it was with my work with Dr. Bondarchuk. I only spent about a year with him, hands-on, but we obviously have a relationship with him, but I learned a lot in that year, and since then, so and I run that system, that program. That's how I train my throwers. So I've always gotten information wherever I can. Dan Paff was a big influence on me, probably the biggest influence on me in terms of an overall coaching philosophy and some of the, a lot of the nuts and bolts pieces of coaching. Got a lot of information from Dan. When I was a young coach, I did 4 visits down to Texas when he was a coach at the University of Texas, 4-week-long visits. And, and he would hand me the keys to his office when he left at night. And I'd stay there till about 1, 2 in the morning, photocopy everything I could. And and taking it home and studying it and working with it and things like that. So, I've worked a bit with István Bali in the Hungarian sports scientist, helping develop long-term athlete development models in Canada here. I could go on and on about some of the influences. My own personal coaches, Andy Higgins was a big influence on me. Charlie was an influence on me as well, Charlie Francis. So I've got a pretty good pedigree in terms of mentorship. I'm not really sure what that says about my coaching, because I'm not as accomplished as any of them. But I have a passion for systems training and things like that, I just enjoy talking about it. So
cool. So you worked for a time with UK Athletics. And obviously been an Englishman and in the kind of the back end of the 2012 Olympics. Do you just want to tell us a little bit about how you got involved with the UK Athletics, what your role was, and what the build-up was like to 2012?
Sure. I was hired by Kevin Tyler and Charles Van Comedy. Kevin Tyler has been a longtime friend of mine since we were kids, teenagers, and he hired me at the Canadian Athletics Coaching Center, was a director there, was my boss. When the UK Athletics hired him, he was the head of coaching for UK Athletics in that 4-year period to lead up to 2012. A few months after he left, they offered me a job there as a center director at the Loughborough Training Center. The British established 2 Olympic training centers going into 2012. One was in London that serviced all the London athletes, and one was in Loughborough that serviced everybody else in the UK. And I just spoke to Dan Paff. He ran the one in London. I ran the one in Loughborough. Tough gig in a lot of ways. It was, me going into it with 0 management skills or experience, and all of a sudden found myself managing 30 plus sports science and national coaches, sports science staff and national coaches. But I think, it took me a while to get, kind of get used to the role. But once I did, I think we did some good work, and it was an amazing experience, mostly because I worked with some phenomenal people in that organization. That was a great organization to work for. They really I can't speak for it now. I haven't been back there in 3 years, almost 3 years. But leading up to 2012, they really handpicked the management staff that ran all of that, and they were all people with a lot of credibility. I probably had the least credibility of sort of the upper management there. And was the least accomplished. But some of the guys I worked with, like Charles and Kevin, had produced Olympic medalists and world champ medalists. And, these were guys with big technical backgrounds in the sport, and they were running the show. And I think, that we were able to make a big difference there. I think Kevin in particular really had a huge impact on coaching in athletics in the UK. Some of his hires, Tom Crick, who did a great job. I think he's now the head guy in Northern Ireland running the show there. We just had a great staff. We had a guy named Simon Nathan, who was our operations guy, and he was phenomenal. He's now moved on. He's the performance director at Australia Athletics. So it was a good group of people. I learned a lot, and it was the best thing I ever did.
So how did that come to an end, Derek?
Well, I was running the center. I enjoyed doing that, but my passion is in coaching. They offered me a good coaching position when I, after the games. But my situation, my home situation, my wife is a lawyer, works for our national railway here in Canada. She was doing her job long distance the whole time we were in Britain, because there was an expectation that we were going to move back. So at the end of the games, it was her job or my job. And, we just decided that, there's probably a little bit more security in hers, and we decided to move back to Canada. And, those things, the UK was a big adjustment for us, but there was some things there that we really enjoyed. I kind of kick myself these days. I don't think I gave it enough opportunity. I'm a big music fan. Didn't go to a single show in the 3 years I was there. So I really kicking myself for that. The schools that my kids went to were phenomenal, but they got a really good start on their education there. So there's a lot that I miss. And I miss working with the people at UK Athletics. They were a good crew.
Mm-hmm. So as far as a system goes to produce athletes, how does the UK system compare to the US or Canadian system?
They're totally different. I mean, it's very hard to compare them. I mean, in terms of if you're talking about like the federation, I mean, the American Federation does not have as much input and support their top athletes anywhere near what UK Athletics does. It's not, you can't even, they're on different planes. But their development system is their NCAA system. And, those who survive that and get through that, there's not, I hear a lot from the American coaches that there's not a lot of opportunity for the athletes once they get out of that. They've got some of their centers in that, some of their training centers now that are doing okay at, some of the work that Nike's doing and things like that. I think they support a lot, but, generally speaking, it's not the, the formal systematic program that you'd see in the UK. In Canada, we try to follow along the same lines that they have in the UK, but we have way less support. So, geography plays a huge part of that. Centralization, I think, made a lot of sense to some degree in the UK. I'm not so sure that makes a lot of sense in Canada. At least if you're going to do it, how you do it has to really reflect the geography and the fact that you have these pockets of development happening all over the country, and those need to be supported, for the sport to grow. And so to, start taking athletes out of that and putting them in centers is sometimes appropriate, sometimes it isn't. And so we struggle with that a lot. And being next to the US and the NCAA system, we have to manage that as well, because that's a big draw for a lot of athletes. It works for a lot of athletes. It's a good option for a lot of athletes, but it's not an option for every athlete. And so we every time we have a regime change, everybody, it seems to, everybody's attitude seemed to shift a little bit towards it, but, or in terms of, how we're going to manage these things. And I don't know if we've ever quite gotten it. There was a lot of advantages that the UK has, having everybody so close. You can get all your national coaches together very easily in a meeting. You can, and your athletes, and you can have a core set of sports science and medical people that can regularly see all your athletes, because nobody has to drive really more than a couple hours to get somewhere. Well, that's not possible in Canada. So we need to find ways to support people that are not in our central communities that are doing good work, right? Because, these are our future coaches and our future practitioners, and we need to support them. And I'm not so sure we always do the best job of doing that. So it's hard to compare those three systems for the various reasons, but hopefully I gave you some insight there.
No, definitely. Very interesting. So you mentioned one of the key influences in your career, and something that I want to kind of focus the bunch of the talk on that we're going to have, is your influence of Bondachuk, and how, do you want to give us a bit of an insight how that came about, the main things that you learned from him whilst working with him?
Yeah, sure. There's a few of us. There's two or three of us around that are kind of becoming the de facto Bondarchuk spokespeople, simply because we've worked with them. Or there's myself. There's Martin Bingisser, who runs a phenomenal site. That his Hammer website. There's a guy, a high school coach in Southern California, who I chat with pretty much daily, and he runs this system better than anybody I've seen. And it's phenomenal. This guy's doing this in high school, and the results he's getting, it's shocking. He's got a very systematic head. His name's Nick Garcia. He's one of the best coaches I know. But he's got a real good situation in high school down there, and he's very happy there. But having said all that, I just want to say at the beginning that I don't speak for Dr. B, and I don't, because he's very peculiar about that kind of thing, and as he should be. I don't think any of us have this system figured out at all, like 100%. I don't even really talk to him a lot about the system anymore, because every time I do, I get more questions than I do answers, and so. I've just taken the basic, the basic system, and I've tried to really study it and make it work, and follow the rules of adaptation and things like that. So, I just need to say that at the beginning, and what we'll talk about today is the Bondarchuk system as I see it and I practice it. You talk to any of the athletes in his program, you may get confirmation of a lot of what I'm talking about. You may get completely opposite viewpoints and experiences that they've had, because his system is highly fluid. It's highly individual. It's very plastic. It changes all the time. So, you need to keep that in mind. But we can discuss more of that. I first came across him. When I was coaching Dylan Armstrong, who is the Canadian shot putter, multiple world champ medalist and Olympic bronze medalist. I coached him from 14 to the age of 25. I coached him up to almost 20 meters. 1983, I think, was his PB when Dr. B came. And Dylan, but Dylan was a hammer thrower as a junior. He was a world junior champ silver medalist. And one of Dr. B's, his son-in-law, his name's Igor Shibarev. He was a NHL hockey player that had retired and was living in Calgary with Dr. Bondarchuk's daughter. They sent me an email one day saying, my father-in-law is in Kuwait coaching. He's looking to come to Canada, and he would like a job coaching throws. Can you give him a job? Basically, that's what the email said, and it was like, here's his resume, and right off the top, it was like, number one is like Coach Yuri Sadiq, world record holder, and so I instantly knew who it was, because anybody who coaches hammer studied Bondarchuk stuff, and I was like, wow. I was like, well, first of all, this is a joke. And I thought it was a friend of mine named Glenn McAtee, who him and I, especially those who follow us on Facebook, know him and I go back and forth. We take shots at each other all the time. We're very close friends. He's a very good coach. Used to coach at Clemson University. Anyways, I thought it was him playing a practical joke on me. And I sent him an email, and I said, hey, yeah, that's pretty funny, the Bondarchuk email. And he's like, that wasn't me. And I was like, wow. And so I couldn't figure it out. So I called the guy, and it turns out, obviously, this was legit. And long story short is, it took 2 or 3 years. Dr. B had some health problems. He was working with the Kuwaiti hammer thrower, wanted to get him through the Olympics in 2004. But eventually in 2005, he moved to Kamloops, and he moved part of the deal. At first we said no to him. For two reasons. One is there wasn't a lot of support within the club to bring another coach on. You got to remember, at the time, I was the only full-time private coach in Canada. I was the only guy in a club that was working full-time. Now it's a little bit different. There's a lot more of that. Still not enough, but more of it. But they were, and I was making peanuts really as a coach doing. I was happy doing what I was doing. I was well looked after, but I wasn't getting rich because the club, it was a small club of like 150 athletes. They just didn't have a lot of money. So we initially said, we would love to have you here, but, we just simply can't afford it. And you have to understand that like no one's going to give you a job here. I would be very surprised. But at the same time, we were just developing, we had started a fundraiser, which you might find amusing. It was a manure sale. We sold bags of manure in the track club. And, that was really taking off. In fact, it took off to the point where in 2004, I think or 2003, we made we just broke $50,000 in a weekend selling manure.
That's a lot of shit. That's a lot of shit.
It's a lot of shit. And we in fact, it's about 80 to 100 tons of it that we would ship into Kamloops, bag it all, and we would deliver it home to home for, at the time, it was about $5 or $6 a bag, and we were just making money hand over fist, right? And under a lot of the laws in British Columbia or in Canada regarding nonprofit societies, you can't show a profit, right? So we were having a hard time finding ways to spend the money. We had so much of it. So we initially said no, but I kept in touch with Igor, and over a couple of years, I said to him, we went back to him. I talked to our club president at the time, who was Dylan Armstrong's mom, and I said, well, why can't we do this? And so we offered him a very modest salary, and we said, look, this is what we can do. We'll give you an apartment. You can live in my basement. I renovated my basement apartment, so I got it all set up for him and his wife, and he grabbed it without even hesitating. And so we bought him a plane ticket, flew him over, and on April 1st of 2005, the day of the manure sale for that year, I went and picked him up at the airport, coveralls on, covered in shit. I picked up him and his son-in-law, Igor, made the trip with him, drove him to my house, put his bags down. I said, look, here's your place. I got to get back to the manure sale. I'll be back later tonight. We can chat. And I came home at 10 o'clock that night. And this little story here really tells you who Dr. B is. I came home at 10 o'clock that night. I'd been working since about 6 a.m. hauling these bags of manure. And we had a huge crews that were going all over the city, but I was just stinking, covered in it. I came home, and the door to his apartment, where in my basement, which that connected to my house, flies open, and he goes, and he couldn't speak almost any English at the time, and he goes, Derek, he goes, sit, we write, and he wanted to write a book right there. And I'm like, so what he had done is he had spent that whole night writing pages for a book, translating them word for word in an English-Russian dictionary, and then he wanted me to go over it, and I would, rework it and make it. And so we actually, for the next 4 or 5 months, we wrote a book, and it was we stopped after 6 chapters because it got. I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, and sorry, I hope that's
okay. Fine, mate. Fine. No worries.
We wrote a book. It was about 6 chapters, and it was basically, if you get his periodization books now, the ones that are have the rough translation, it was basically a combination of a lot of the chapters, mainly the first one, but with some other things in there. And that's where I learned it. That's where I learned everything from him, was writing that book with him. And then, we would literally go out, we would coach 2 workouts a day. I'd sit there with him, watch him coach. Then we would go home and we'd write for about 3-4 hours a day. And basically it was me taking this gobbledygook that he had translated and me trying to make sense of it and ask him questions. But remember, his English wasn't good. So it was painful. It was so painful. And after about 6 chapters, and I did all those charts you see in the first book, particularly, and the second one, I did all those in the original book. And so I did them all on Word. And but it got so painful. We both were arguing so much about things that because he just couldn't quite understand what I was trying to say. And there's something with English Russian translation where opposites are really screwy. So a lot of the problems we had were he would think what I was trying to write down, he would think I was turning things around into the opposite what he wanted to mean. And it would take me 15 minutes to explain it to him. And then he would go, oh, okay. And after 6 months of that, we got kind of 5 months of that. We got tired of it, both of us. So we shelved the book. No one's ever seen that book. It was shelved, and I didn't want to see any more of it. He didn't want to see any more of it. And about 7 years later, 7 years later, I was mentioning it to Martin. And now I'm not allowed to share this book. I promised Dr. B I wouldn't do it. And it's all in the books he's got now anyway. But I always look back on that book and I thought to myself, yeah, it's probably his books are way better. And, he's, because he actually had it translated. And I literally hadn't looked at it in 6, 7 years. I mentioned it to Martin, and then Martin said, well, can I look at it? And I said, sure, I'll send you a copy of it, but you can't, because just I wanted to honor Dr. B's request, not, I can't be sending stuff out. Anyways, so I sent it to Martin, and Martin goes, this is really good. Like I can actually understand some of the concepts. And so I went back and I read it, and I was like, yeah, we did a pretty good job with it. I was pretty proud of it. And so I still go back now and I look at it, particularly the chapter on periodization. He's got a lot of rules there that I still follow, a lot of which we'll talk about today. But so anyways, that's how I learned from him, was writing that book and being able to talk to him every day and watching him and how he did things. And so it was an incredible experience. He's an amazing guy. He's hard to figure out, very easy to misinterpret, but it was a good experience for me.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned there about periodization. So do you just want to give us a bit of an insight into his kind of way he periodizes his training?
Well,
very broad subject,
yeah, that's a big question. Okay, big question. So it's really, it's the thing I like about it is that it's hugely individualized, and it's in fact, that's the basis for everything that he does. Okay, so the way that I usually try to explain this when I'm explaining to people is that it takes what our traditional ideas of periodization, regardless of whether you're talking about a stage methodology or Vershansky, or you're talking about Matveyev or any of those classic periodization models, which are a lot which are still relevant to a lot of people today. It takes that and it flips it right around 180 degrees. So, and by that I mean, if you look at the old periodization models, what they do is they go, okay, look, you're an athlete. Let's say you're a discus thrower. You're a discus thrower. You're going to start training here in September 15th. And you need to peak by August 10th in the next year. And what we're going to do there is we're going to divide up the year into sections, periods. We're going to do this kind of work here, and you will peak here, and then you will peak here. And maybe let's say it's a shot putter and it's indoor. So you're going to peak indoors, then you're going to peak for summer season, and your body has no choice. We are going to manipulate all those variables so that you do peak. He does the exact opposite. What he does is sorry, just to back up, in order to manipulate those variables, we are going to change volume, change intensity. We're going to manipulate those variables. Your body is going to respond, and it's going to respond by this date. And, that's how it works, right? He does the opposite. And I'm not saying that doesn't work. That works really well. And, it's worked very well for a lot of people. This is just different. Okay. It's just a different system. What he does is he he does not waive load, volume, and intensity at all. If you read that first book, the very first thing he talks about, at least in our book, he did, it was the first thing. But I think in his first periodization book, he talks about the large waves of volume and intensity, and how the more modern systems don't have the huge waves. Okay, so imagine doing if you're doing German volume training or something like that, where you're doing, in the fall, you're doing huge amounts of general type work, very little throwing, if any, specific work. And that wave is followed by a wave of maximal strength. And that wave is followed by a wave of specific strength. And then that wave is followed by a wave of throwing, very specific work. And then you peak at the end of it, okay? Everything's built on a foundation of what comes before it. He doesn't do that. What he does is he uses mainly what's called a complex methodology, but that's, again, it gets a bit complicated because the complex methodology is just one of the various methods he has in his book. I think in the first book, he talks about 16 of them, but he does... Normally in athletics, we use about 4 or 5 of those. He uses and throws mostly complex. And in maintenance periods, he uses the variation. You'd have to look in the books to see what those mean, or we can discuss in a bit. But anyways, the key is that he does not manipulate volume and intensity at all. When he gives an athlete a workout, it basically stays the same, okay? And that is the key point. If you don't understand that, you're not going to understand this system, and this system is not going to work for you. Because the moment that you go to change anything in an athlete's program, their system is going to react to it. That's not bad. It's just the way it is. It's not good. It's not bad. It's the way it is. And in this system, he chooses not to do that, okay? So the workouts stay the same. Let's say I give you a workout, or I give the shot putter a workout. It's 20 throws with couple different types of shot. Then they go in the weight room, they do some squats or some cleans, let's say. Then they go and they do some other general work, and maybe there's some special exercises in there. That doesn't change from day to day. They will repeat that, okay? And then what he does is they measure every day. They have a measurable. In throwing, it's very easy to use for, it's very easy to have a specific measurable every day, because you just measure your throws, right? And I've been using bar velocities too, which we can talk about later to do that. But let's say you measure every day, and you will find that there's a curve that an athlete follows there, okay? And if you look at his books, one of the big confusing things for a lot of people is the 3 reactions he talks about, where reaction 1 is the athlete grows, so the performance gets better. It's a line on a graph, and that line goes up, and then it plateaus. Then that's number 1. Number 2 is the line goes down, so the initial results in training go down, then they come up, then they plateau. And then there's a number 3, which is they plateau, then they go down, then they come up, and they plateau again at a higher level. Okay, in all 3 of those, there's growth, so they finish off throwing further than they started. Okay. I think that comes from Matviev, but I'm not entirely sure about it. But that's standard. That's pretty classic Russian research. That's where it comes from in those 3 reactions. Okay, so all athletes. So you've given them a workout. Maybe it's 2 workouts, maybe it's 3, but we'll just use 1 for example, just because it makes it easier to explain. And you're recording the results. And then what you do is when that athlete peaks, so when they're in peak condition and they're throwing their furthest, okay, then you have to decide what you're going to do. So let's say that's the end of the development cycle. All right. That period from when you started to the end, that's your development cycle. And you measure that, how many workouts or how many, however you measure it. It's not really, we don't really do it with time. We do it with the number of sessions, of training sessions. So say it took 30 training sessions to reach that peak condition. Then if you can repeat that down the road over the course of the next year or so, then you have a very stable block I don't know what you want to call it, a very stable unit to work with. That's your development cycle. So if you can repeat that, then you know that in 30 sessions, that athlete's going to peak, and you'd be amazed. Like in my experience, it's very reliable. If you and in Martin's experience, and particularly in Nick Garcia's experience, the guy I told you in Southern California, I talk with him a lot to find out what his, what the numbers he gets are, because he finds the same thing, that it's very consistent. With some athletes you can peg it on a single session. You'll say it's 32 sessions, right? But so it's usually a range. When I worked with Sophie Hitchin in the UK, when she was young, it was about 45 to 50 sessions. As she grew and she got more used to the system and she became more an elite athlete, that got whittled down to about 34 to 36 sessions. And she set a British record in qualifying at the Olympics in 2012. That was her 34th session. And I could show you that graph. It just went straight up. She was a number one. Okay. Mark Dry, the other guy that the male I worked with there, he was usually about 28 to 32 sessions. Sultana Purcell, the woman I work with now, she's, depending on how many programs we use, she's usually 16 to 24. So everybody's different. Okay. So you got to find out what is that number of sessions? What does that period look like? I've made it sound a lot simpler than it actually is, because you have to take into consideration the type of work they're doing and the ball weights and all that kind of thing. But it's essentially, that's what you're doing. Once you have done that, and the athlete has reached peak condition, you have your development cycle, it's finished, they've reached peak condition, you have to then decide what you're going to do. And this is the part that I struggled with initially, and I'm still experimenting with a lot, and that is, you can't just repeat, and this is all of this I'm explaining to you is in his books, but it's not, you won't get it from the text. You got to look at the charts, okay? And so, and what I just described to you was based on a complex methodology, the complex method, okay? It would also work for the variation method. So the complex method is where you don't change anything through the development cycle. Everything, it just stays the same. You're not changing the exercises, you just, that's it. So once they reach peak condition, you have to decide, am I going to try to maintain that peak condition? And you would maintain it because you would have a series of meets. Say you had to maintain form for 2 months. Then you could just, and let's say you had to maintain form for 1 month. and that development cycle you just did took you 6 weeks. You don't have time to do it again. Okay. So you'd have to maintain it. So in order to maintain it, you would basically follow the same format, but you would change the exercises every 2 weeks. That's called a variation method. And if you look in his books, it's all right there, okay? You'll see there's a chart there where it goes up, where the 3 lines go up, they reach peak condition, and then he changes to a variation. And when you change to variation, if you change it often enough, they won't drop. And he told me once that you can maintain form that way for up to 4 months doing that. If you have time, then what you want to do is you want to do another development cycle. But the problem is you can't just follow it with another development cycle. You have to have a rest period in between. So you need to go into a rest period. And, he says most athletes take 3 to 4 weeks of rest before you can do another development cycle. I think he says that in his book. But in reality, we found ways to shorten that. Using exercise, using an active rest program, where we actually throw in it, without getting too into the depths of it, but it's, basically we count the number of session and the number of times that an athlete does a general strength circuit combined with some throws. And so in his book, he calls it rest circuit, rest cycle. I call it a wash cycle, because the way I look at it is, once that athlete has reached peak condition, they got there using a certain set of exercises. Okay, you need to wash that out. Okay, you need to wash it out so that when you start the next development program, you're starting with a the system does not remember those exercises from before, because you have to start with a new set, okay, in order to create more growth. And so the whole periodization system is basically built upon how you manipulate these three cycles: the development cycle, the maintenance cycle, and the rest cycle. And you can follow a development cycle with another development cycle, but if you look at, and he has that example in his books, but they will not grow. What they will do, they will maintain for a while, drop down, come back up, and maintain at the same level. It looks like the Van Halen logo. If you, for those of you who are Van Halen fans, that's what it looks like if you don't do a rest or a maintenance cycle after a development cycle. Now, so that's the basic periodization. That's how it works. It's not more it's actually in its basic in the basic structure, it's very, very simple. What's complicated is studying that reaction that an athlete has within the development cycle and knowing when to change things. That's what trips people up, and that's where people struggle with it. And they struggle with the whole idea of not wave loading, volume, and intensity. They want to change things. That we're used to changing things all the time, right? And that works if you can count on the change. But what I found, especially after working with this system, is that athletes change are especially elite athletes. They react to changes in training. They're way more sensitive to it than we think, okay? Because in using this system where I don't change it at all, at times where for whatever reason I've had to make a change, they've reacted hugely. Or say, there needs to be a change. It wasn't planned. Let's say you had to travel or something like that, or there was an equipment failure or something like that. You change an exercise, even in the weight room, their body reacts to it. So to me, I look back on when I used to do a more traditional system, and I think of all the change that was going on from week to week that I used to do. I mean, I used to do what I thought was a Bondarchuk system with Dylan, and I would change everything every 2 weeks with him because he thrived on change. But in fact, what I was doing is, even in those 2 weeks, every 2 to 3 weeks, even in those short 2 to 3 week cycles, I was one day we would be lifting heavy, one day we would be lifting fast, one day we would be throwing 20 throws, another day we might be throwing, you know what I mean? Like you change things up all the time, because it's just, it's kind of the paradigm that we all operate in when you're doing that kind of system. In this system, you don't do that. And in doing that, I found that I've really come to understand how the body reacts to training. It's really been a really good education that way. So, and then the last thing I should say, and this is one of the benefits to doing this program, is that, prior to this, I would, I'll use Dylan as an example, but I've done this system with not just throwers, but sprinters and that. Prior to this, I know that, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Oh, yes. So for Dylan, I would do 2 to 3 peaks a year, okay? Maybe triple periodization, okay? In this one, we find that development cycle is a lot shorter than athletes come into peak a lot faster when you're not changing volume and intensity, okay? When you're not wave loading it, when things stay the same. So I've found with most athletes, I'll get anywhere from 6 to 7, sometimes 8 peaks in a season, depending on how our competition season looks. And the idea is that with every one of those development cycles, with every one of those peaks, you should see overall growth in the athlete's ability, okay, depending on their age and things like that. Like with Sultana right now, it's hard to get growth out of every single cycle because she's 30 years old and she's been a high performance athlete for a long time. There's, whereas if you got an 18, 20-year-old, like with Sophie Hitchin, and Mark Dry, like, especially in the last year in 2012 with Mark Dry, when, he had quit his job, and a lot of the life things that were kind of holding him back, he had really made a commitment towards, going to the Olympics. And I could show you graphs where every single cycle he did, he improved. He got better. Okay. So the idea is that with more peaks comes more growth overall in the long term. And so you just want to keep doing that, and they grow faster. And that's kind of been my experience, both with Sophie, with Mark, and with some of the athletes I've trained with here in Canada. I mean, Sultana, like, they grow a lot, they grow more, and they grow faster when they're doing this, or at least faster than when I used the other type of training before. Like I said, I'm not saying anything here is better than anything else. I'm just saying this is just sort of the way we do it. And so the other big advantage to it, which I heard Dr. B talk about recently, and is important to point out, if an athlete's growth in performance and their growth to a peak condition is so hugely dependent upon the nature of the exercises that you give them. Okay. So, and we all know that, right? Certain athletes really respond well to certain exercises and certain schemes, certain loading schemes. And if you're talking about throws, you're talking about, there's certain weights that athletes will really respond to. If you have those weights in their program, they're going to throw their competitive implement very far. There's certain types of work that sprinters really respond well to. Certain athletes will respond to longer distances. Other athletes respond to shorter, more intensive distances. So all those, and Dr. Bondachuk considers all that exercises. We consider all, when I say exercise, I'm talking about everything. Okay. So everybody sort of, the nature of that development cycle really depends on those, the makeup of those exercises. What are the combinations and the size and scope of what you're giving them. Okay. If you screw that up, so let's say you give athletes exercises, because a lot of this is about experimentation, just like for anyone. It's about, you got to try things. You got to throw things against the wall, see what sticks. Some things are going to stick, some things aren't going to stick. If you throw in a bunch of stuff against the wall 1 year and you peak once a year and you screw it up, well, you got to wait another year before you can redo it, right? I mean, it's a very simplistic analogy, but it illustrates the point. Whereas when you peak sooner, if I had one earlier this year with Sultana that was just picked a bad set of exercises, and there wasn't much growth at all. I didn't get a very good curve. There wasn't a lot of growth. And so, okay, I'm not going to do those. I'm going to look and evaluate what was in that cycle. And there's certain things there that I think were the culprits, that were responsible for the lack of growth. I'm going to not put those in the cycle going into world champs or something like that. Okay. So, but I have time to change it because we peak 6-7 times a year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay. So that's kind of in a nutshell. I mean, this is a very hard system to explain in 20 minutes, but I think I've kind of just given you the nutshell. And then of course the other thing, which if you're reading the books, you have to really take the time to read the exercise classifications that he has, the 4 exercise classifications, which going from top to bottom are the competitive exercise, which is what you do, the specific development exercises, which are exercises that in the formal definition, basically they repeat the competitive exercise in movement and in component parts. And they stimulate the same system. Okay, so in throwing, that would be stand throws, certain types of drills with throws drills. In sprinting, those would be, towing and the other definition is that they can exceed them in certain conditions. So, in sprints, it would be towing sleds, running hills, things like that. Sprints would be certain drill exercises and things. That would be SDE, specific development exercises. Then the third one down is SPE, which is specific preparation exercises, which generally speaking are your weight room exercises, but they're formally explained as exercises that do not follow the competitive movement, but they use the same major muscle groups. Okay, so this is where Olympic lifts and squats and things like that really, because as you can imagine, they use all the same major, extensor chains and all these things. They use the same basic large muscle groups, but they don't stimulate, and they do stimulate the same system. Okay, so if you're a thrower, the nature of that work is going to be brief, explosive if possible, that kind of thing. And then at the bottom, you have general preparation exercises, which don't look like the competitive movement and don't stimulate the same system. If you look at some of the presentations I've done that are probably floating around the net, I use a very good graphic to explain that Tom Crick, our guy at the UK, did up, and he just brilliantly explained it in a graphic that makes it, it's shaped like a pyramid, and at the top is the CE, competitive exercise. At the bottom is the general exercises. So from the top down, it gets less. It's more specific at the top. It's less specific at the bottom. At the bottom, you have huge amount of exercises to draw from. At the very top, you basically only have one, which is the competitive exercise. So I just throw that in there because, it's important when you're talking Bondarchuk, quote unquote, that you understand that exercise categorization, because it really helps you understand the system. He does not look at things in terms of he can, but he doesn't really define things in terms of specific strength and things like that. It's all based on those exercise classifications and how those exercise transfer to the competitive event.
Have you got access to that exercise classification pyramid
right now?
Well, not right now, but just for later. That could stick online. Is that all right?
Absolutely. I'll send it to you. Yeah.
Perfect. That'd be great. So just
as long as Tom doesn't mind, but I'm sure Tom won't mind. He's let me use it in many of my presentations. He did such a good job with it. I never bother trying to do it again because he did such a good job. I just use his.
Awesome. Cool. So, there's a couple of questions that I've written down. There's about 6 actually. So, just to just simplify my for my simplistic head. So, when you're looking at peak condition, so you're looking at them, how many weeks it takes to get to peak condition. How do you know what peak condition is? Is it solely based on the length of the throw? Okay, so that's a very good question. Okay, and so for your listeners that are not throws coaches, this is that's probably the first question that comes in there. How do I measure peak condition? If you're a football player, how do you do that, right? So for us, it is solely. Well, I wouldn't say it's solely, but it's mainly the distance. Okay, so we measure our furthest throw with each type of hammer we throw every day, and we record it. Simple as that. But I back it now. Those curves are not perfect all the time. You will have spikes, and so they may come out one day, and maybe you got a really good wind if you're a discus thrower, so it might go a little bit further, right? So what I'll do is I'd always try to back it up with observations, talking to the athlete, how do you feel that? But basically, most of it comes down to distance. What I've been doing this last year is I've been using the bar accelerometer, the push accelerometer, and I've been just for fun. I just saw it there and it was cheap, so I thought it was cheap enough. Anyways, I bought one and I thought, you know what, I'm going to slap one of these on the athletes, and I'm going to, at the same time as just in training, I'm going to start measuring bar velocities. Now you have to remember something here.
we don't change the weights. Okay. So when we start, if I give an athlete, say I give Sultana 4 sets of 5 snatches at 60 kilos, it's going to stay that way right through the development cycle, which is a lot different than what a lot of people do. Okay. And that's a very important point for what I'm about to explain.
So, sorry to interrupt. Just before I forget, Derek, how do you choose that? Where's that weight come from? How do you pinpoint that?
Well, this is the other thing. This is the other thing. Okay. So I'll back up. So we don't max test. We don't max test in this system, because if I max test, it's going to throw the body all out of whack. Okay. So if I start off a development cycle and I get everybody to max test so I can work off of a percentage, then they're going to trust me. Okay. They are going to react to that, just that workout where you tested. I mean, think about what you got to do when you max test. It's a huge draw on the central nervous system. That's going to affect their throwing. Could be positive, could be negative. I don't know. But I'm not going to, but if I the next day come out and do, 5 sets of 5, and I do that for the rest of the cycle, that is going to skew, the initial testing is going to skew my curve. Okay. So I don't do that. Okay. Now that presents a problem, because the problem is, how do I determine the loads? Well, the way Bondarchuk does it is he just guesses, like literally just off experience, just picks a weight. And this is where you get these, these rumors and these, or not rumors, but these, these anecdotes about the athletes that train with him about how they lift so light. And a lot of it, he just picks weights and just, I asked him in the first few weeks when he started writing programs with me, or when he started writing programs and I was involved in it, when he was, after I turned Dylan over to him, I said, well, how do you know? Like, how do you, because I used to work off all percentages, and we used to max test once a week or every couple of weeks and all that kind of thing, or at the beginning of a cycle. And he just goes, oh, I just know. He goes, I just know that there's a range in there that a world-class guy is going to be at. And, it wasn't a big deal to him. Let's put it that way. For me, it is a little bit more of a big deal. I'm a little bit more anal. I'm a little bit more of a control freak. So ever since I started doing this, I've always wanted to figure out, how can I find the range? And, the range that we usually stay within is probably somewhere in the strength speed zone or speed strength zone. Although I do go up into max strength, we do a few cycles like that. I will give them that kind of work. Bondarchuk doesn't at all. I still go there a little bit, I think, just for the sake of the change, and I think they do need it every once in a while. But mainly we stay in the middle of the force velocity curve there. And so, or in the middle zone there. And so I was thinking, well, how do I know where I am? I mean, they could, because I know they're getting stronger, because they're just getting stronger from training, right? So along comes this push thing, and I'm thinking, I'm start doing some research on it, and I realized that, one thing I see in the research is that if you are within certain speeds, generally speaking, you're going to be within a certain area on that force velocity curve. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do it. Okay. So I get the thing, and that's why I initially got it. But what happened was, I get the thing, I strap it on to the girls, Megan Rohde and Sultana and Heather Stacy, who I'm throwing, or who I'm coaching now. And remember, okay, so we start off a cycle. I have a curve a graph that I follow. I input the numbers every day, and it gives me a performance curve, right? Well, lo and behold, I start doing it with the accelerometer, and the path of the speeds that I was recording with the accelerometer almost identically matched the path of the throwing distances. Which I thought, to me, I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. Like that says a lot right there, right? So, I think, one thing, it speaks a lot about using a complex methodology. So what that was telling me was, when she was coming into peak condition in throwing, she was also coming into peak conditioning in her snatch. okay, because it was getting faster. As she was throwing further, she was able to pull the weight faster, and there was generally they were rising the same at the same. It's not identical, but it's impressively close, those curves. And so I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. And so so we've done, and I've repeated that on numerous cycles now, and it's quite interesting. And I've tried different schemes, but basically, as long as I don't wave load the volume and intensity, I'm going to get very close with that bar velocity curve as I do to the throwing curve. You know, to me, so back to my original point here is that if I have a spike in the middle of that curve, I can use the bar speed measure that day, because every day we throw, every workout we throw, we lift. We don't have sessions where we don't throw and we lift, or we don't lift and we throw. We always do the same. That's another hallmark of kind of this Bondarchuk system. We're doing everything all the time. And so if I have a spike one day, let's say, you know, we get a good wind or something, or they catch one and there's a big spike, I'll look at the bar speed and I'll say, okay, well, the bar speed is following the normal curve, you know, so we're probably not coming into peak condition. But let's say down the road, when I suspect they are coming into peak condition, I will see, you know, I'll know it because they start putting a lot of throws at a far distance. They'll have, you know, say they're doing 10 throws, 8 of them will be at a very high level, and all the sets in the weight room are all going to be very fast and at a high level. And those are my only two measurables. Those are my only two objective measurables that I have. When I see that, I know they're in peak condition, and I know I need to make a change very soon.
That's really interesting. Very interesting. So what device are you using for your to measure your bar velocity? You say
I'm using a push accelerometer. That's the Canadian one, you know. Yeah. It's the wireless one.
Yeah.
You know, I'd like to also get a Tendo. I just can't afford it. I mean, I fund this whole thing here myself, and so you know, so I mean, I'd rather pay $250 than $2,500.
Yeah, absolutely.
But go ahead.
No, sorry, mate. Go on. You're all right.
No, I was just going to say, but you know, I mean, I can get 3 pushes. So I got 3 pushes. Each girl has one. I'm not coaching Megan anymore, but you know, we got one from, you know, when I had 3 girls, they each had one. Now I have 2, they each have one. And so they just strap it on, and every time they lift, it's so easy to use, right? So but I would like to line it up with a Tendo and see if I'm getting the same results. But to me, the fact that those curves are following the throwing curves, you know, the absolute values to me on those speeds are not that important. It's the day-to-day relative values, you know. So I always take an average. The number I record in my data sheet is not the fastest. It's usually an average of the fastest rep of each set or something like that. And you know, because I want to know on average where they're at each day, right? So
that's great. Got some little guys knocking about as well.
Yeah, my kids are playing around. So
that's cool.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's how that works.
Cool. So, I mean, it's just ticked over an hour, so I don't want to keep you much longer. But I know you obviously you're going to the World Championships next week. Is that right? It's probably happening. It's probably happening by the time I put the podcast out. So who is it that you've got over there? Which girl is it?
I've got Sultana Frizzell, just only Sultana.
Okay, cool. So have you got any, after World Championships, have you got any big events coming up, somewhere where people can kind of keep in touch with your work?
No, I don't have any conferences scheduled. I don't have anything scheduled right now. I'm sort of looking for things. I mean, people can just reach out to me. It's fine. I'm usually, a lot of times, especially in this next month when I'm away, it may take me a while to get back to you, but I do, or go through Martin's website. I answer the odd question. Someone will send him a question. He'll send it to me and I'll answer. I'm always willing to help out people that are interested in this. And if I can pick their brains as well, I would appreciate that. But yeah, I'm always willing to help where I can.
Well, as we said before, we're probably going to put the podcast will probably go out after the World Championships anyway.
Right.
So hopefully you'll have a bit more time after you come back after a successful World Championships.
Sure. Yeah, and if you want to do another one of these some other time, if people have questions. I mean, this whole Bondarchuk thing just creates all kinds of questions, because it's a very hard thing to explain. It's a very simple system, but it's hard to explain because there's so much fluidity to it. So, if anybody's got questions, we could do, whatever. I'm open to anything.
No, it'd be great. It'd be great to do another one and get a bit more detail on on a few issues. But what's the best place for people to get to know about? I know he's obviously got numerous books. Where's the best place to go to learn about the system itself?
Well, probably Martin's website. If you pick around there, I mean, he doesn't have anything on there that goes I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't speak for him there, but I'm not sure if there's anything on there that goes from A to Z. Here's the Bondachuk system, but he is probably, for sure, he's undoubtedly the greatest resource online that you can find. On the Canadian Athletics Coaching Center, I posted a lot of older stuff about Bondarchuk, and there's a lot of nuggets in there that you can get. I know that Dr. Bondarchuk, I mean, if you're into the books are a tough read, and some are better than others. But once you start working the system, and if you're interested in it, the books make a lot more sense after, and they're worth it if only for the charts. So you can go to Ultimate Athlete Concepts, the guy that, and I don't get anything out of this at all. So I don't even get a free book. So, I'm just purely on the up and up here. If you go, the Joseph, I can't remember his last name, the guy that runs it there, he's got all kinds of Bondarchuk stuff there. It's really good. And they just came out with a new Asurum book, which I might get. It looks really good. So I've seen that bopping around the net now. So,
what's the Canadian site that you mentioned?
Canadian Athletics Coaching Center. Do a Google search on that. I think it's athleticscoaching.ca. And you have to sort of sign up for it. But once you're there, there's a ton of free print material, which I loaded on there. This is 8 years ago, but it's still all up there. Anything I would send anybody is on there because I literally posted just about every single piece of document I had in my library. So you go on there, look. There's numerous ways to find Bondarchuk. It's very easy to find. There is also videos on there from some of the presentations that him and I did together, and some ones that he did on his own that we filmed. There's a number of them on there. I think you have to pay for those, but they're pretty cheap if you want to do the video thing. So
cool. And you say you're on Facebook and Twitter as well.
Facebook and Twitter. Evil Track is my Twitter handle, and Facebook just Derek Evely. Cool.
Well, like I say, cool. Well, like I say, we've kept you for ages now, but there's so much to kind of take away, and I've got tons of notes. So if you won't mind, we'll get you back on for part 2 if that's all right.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll let you go, and just thank you for your time again.
No problem. I really enjoyed it, and you do a good job with that with this podcast. You're doing great work.
Thank you, mate. Cheers. Appreciate that. All right. Speak to you soon.
All right. Take care.
See you, mate. Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in to episode 51 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. Don't forget you can check out all the links that Derek mentioned on the episode if you go to paceyperformance.co.uk/51. You can also catch up with all previous episodes of the podcast, so over 50 now, at paceyperformance.co.uk/podcast. And just one last mention for the Pacey Performance webinar series with Dan Baker. Get over to Pacey Performance and you can see all the information around what's going to be a great morning speaking with Dan Baker. And I will speak to you in episode 52.